Yeah, and we talked about this earlier. I was able to go to the SFO museum and see their archives, and it kind of puts you in that place to see those primary sources and to hold those newspapers and to, look at the original photos. It's like a different experience. You're really kind of embedded into it rather than looking at it through a screen.
Yeah, it's very, very tangible and
Yeah.
tactile to hold those documents that others had seen and worked with all that time ago and had recorded those events. So
Yeah. We have a question. Have you or any of the organizations that you're affiliated with looked into the USS Cyclops? Are you familiar with that?
I'm familiar with the story. Yes, we have not investigated it ourselves at RC Heritage Foundation, and I don't believe that's one that Search Incorporated has taken on, but that is certainly one of the more celebrated disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle. Navy collier that disappeared in 1918.
And then obviously we're here in the South Pacific off the coast of American Samoa. How long, Dee Dee, do you think we'll continue to scan for the wreckage? Do we have sort of an idea of what our time frame is?
Yeah, so we're probably going to continue doing these pre-planned survey lines through the night and into morning, midday tomorrow before we reassess and relook at the targets that we've identified after some processing. And if there's any that looks promising enough, we'll most likely stop with the planned survey lines and use Argus's camera to go over those and see what they are.
And we're at just under about 3 dozen potential targets, is that?
Yeah, we're up to 34 targets.
34 targets.
Yes.
And are any of these sort of giving off more definitive characteristics of what we're looking for, maybe than others?
Oh, for sure. There's I would say, one or two that don't look like the rest, which is a good thing. Some of the other ones could be geology. We'll have to compare what they look like. One of the nice things about all of these programs is you can save them, and we can pull them all up maybe as a group. And if they're starting to look the same, then they're probably geology. But when you're looking at this live, it's better to mark it and save it, and then go back and look at it when you have a fresh set of eyes with you.
Measure once, or what is the saying? Measure twice, cut once.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Yes. And then you might see something, but nobody else agrees with you.
Yeah. And then what are we looking for exactly? I mean, how do you tell a human object versus a biological or geological feature?
So it's mainly having to do with the shape of that object. Mother Nature doesn't make particularly square items with straight lines in right corners or edges. Rocks are round, with uneven edges. So we are looking for anything that looks man-made in origin, such as the parts of an airplane or a shipwreck. They would have distinctive straight lines and edges, and also the material would be different. They would be made out of aluminum, iron, or steel, which would be different than the geologic formations. Like we're seeing a good image of the seafloor right now of those rock piles, possibly volcanic in origin. So those are the types of different characteristics that we're looking for.
Awesome, and it is unique to sort of have that video paired with our sonar data as well.
Yes, so right now you're seeing the great images of the seafloor with the scattered boulders or rocks, and then the accompanying side scan sonar waterfall that is also showing those same sorts of features and what they look like with the acoustic image coming back.
And it is unique that we're using Argus only for this segment. Does maybe one of our ROV pilots want to dive into why why only using Argus as opposed to both of them?
So we're using just Argus right now because we're doing these pre-planned survey lines, and we're using Argus as sort of a tow sled, so we can drag it behind us with the side scan sonar. Hercules is more for a specific site we want to look at, so that's why we might call on him later on. But for now, we're just using Argus, so we can use that video and sonar capabilities as we move along and get this general survey before we move on to the targets.
And then once we move on to the targets, we'll bring Hercules down, and that will enable us to see in a little bit more detail.
That is correct. Hercules has much more sophisticated camera systems and lighting systems that can help us do a site documentation and close-up investigation of specific features.
And then realistically, I mean, you know, we've talked a little bit about this, but what might we expect to find based on other aircrafts or vessels that have been found at such depths, right, with this pressure and sort of the notion that no light reaches the bottom of the ocean at this location?
Well, we're optimistic that that the conditions here could have preserved the wreck in quite good condition. There have been recent discoveries in the last couple of years of deep water aircraft, an Air France Constellation, Lockheed Constellation airliner that was ditched into the Mediterranean and discovered recently, where you can actually still read the logo of the Air France on the side of the plane. And then also a group of aircraft that were lost on board the aircraft carrier USS Lexington during the Battle of the Coral Sea, and were distributed around the wreck site, which was discovered in March of 2018 by the team from research vessel Petrel. And those aircraft are in astounding condition, especially there's one fighter plane, an F-4, F-3 Wildcat, and 7 TBD-1 Devastator torpedo bombers that look almost as if they'd been placed there the day before. In terms of the paintwork is still bright. You can read the fuselage codes and the squadron markings and see the national insignia, the Bureau of Aeronautics number on the tails, and where even the doped fabric on the control surfaces has survived intact, and it has a lot to do with the very great depth and the cold of the water, and the lack of bacterial activity, and the lack of light, which prevents coral growth and much in the way of any kind of marine organisms that would have any adverse effect on the historic structure. And it's also the great depth shelters it from inadvertent disturbance by, say, trawling operations, which would not normally reach to those depths, and it keeps it sheltered from any sort of storm and wave action. So in this case, we're very optimistic that perhaps the same kind of conditions that prevail in the Coral Sea may also exist here, and that it's a similar depth and virtually the same vintage, in that the Lexington and its aircraft went down just 4 years after the loss of Samoan Clipper, so they are of the same time frame, and so and there have been a couple of other discoveries. A few years ago, the Hawaii Undersea Research Lab found a Grumman TBF Avenger in several thousand feet of water, that was, looked like it had been a forced landing, a ditching, and the plane was, sitting virtually intact on the bottom of the Pacific, and and this ship, Nautilus, 3 years ago, discovered an airplane wreck inside of a shipwreck when they located a Grumman F-6F Hellcat fighter in the forward elevator of the wrecked USS Independence off the coast of California, where again I was privileged to be in this spot, in this actually in Suna's chair, but yeah, watching that unfold and helping to identify the aircraft, and in that case, again the aluminum was looked perfectly intact, and where you could see the national insignia, the stars and bars in white on a navy blue wing, one of which was propped up against the wall of the forward bulkhead of the elevator, and but you could make out the cockpit, and though it was silted up, filled with debris, you could make out some of the instruments and read some of the nomenclature on the side of the airplane, and the oil tank on the top of the engine accessories unit was bright yellow, and yeah, it just looked incredibly well preserved, and so we're hoping to add to that knowledge of deep water plane wrecks, and understand more about that site formation and how they survive, and what the long-term prospects are for preservation of these cultural resources in the deep sea.
And so we can kind of, imagine or guess what we might see and what's preserved, but what do we know was recovered from the surface at the time of the accident when the Navy did go and investigate?
Yeah, there was a very small amount of debris that was found, floating on the surface, and it was all like very, very small bits and pieces, and some of it charred or torn, and they described it as it was all obviously it was all things that could float, and things like partitioning from the walls, and flooring, and what was described as the navigator's drift target tray, which I believe would have been made of wood, and that had part of the plywood flooring of the compartment driven edgewise into it, from the force of the explosion, and bits of paper, like navigational texts from the navigator's compartment, and really, most heartbreaking of all, items of clothing, the jacket with its Pan Am wings still affixed to it that belonged to the radio operator Tom Findlay, and a pair of trousers with a bent tie clasp in the pocket, which was identified as belonging to Jack Brooks, who was the assistant engineer. And all of those things were collected and placed into just a very small bag, and you see that there's a picture that ran in the New Zealand Herald that shows that bag being landed back at the dock in Pongo Pongo, and we have the correspondence from the radiograms that are preserved at the University of Miami, where the station manager Conley here in Pongo Pongo advises that he's turned over the artifacts or the debris collected to the master of a Matson Line ship that is on its way back to San Francisco, and the master is going to lock it in his safe and will turn it over to Pan American officials when he reaches port, which from newspaper accounts we know that it did happen, and that they intended to turn those items over to the Bureau of Air Commerce, which clearly they did, because the analysis of those pieces and what it means are included in the Bureau of Air Commerce report that was dated April 1st, 1938. So what became of them after that point, we don't know. That's where the trail runs cold, on that aspect. But um, probably they were destroyed. I don't know that there was perceived to be a reason to retain those those sad reminders of that day. Um, once their perceived usefulness in the investigation was done. Um, but yeah, and as to what remains on the ocean floor, I mean, we can be hopeful. I think that that it is in remarkable shape, or at least comparable to what it was after the horrible events that took place. So I know I've imagined what that site could be like, and uh, the notion of the lights of Hercules falling on the named Samoan clipper on the bow would be a dream come true. To know for certain that we've done it and finally found it. Um, there's several um, distinct markings that were on the airplane. That name and the distinctive Pan Am winged globe, the demi-vol as it was called, adorning the bow, and then the legend Pan American Airways system painted to the length of the fuselage. Um, the Sikorsky aircraft logo, on the vertical tail, along with um, the federal registration number, NC16734, and that number would also be repeated in large letters on the upper and lower surfaces of the wing, which, in contrast to the rest of the airplane, which was really just a bare metal silver color all over. The upper surfaces and lower surfaces of the wing were filled in mainly with what was called international orange, which made them highly visible. Which was desirable. That if the intent was that if the plane was forced down, that at sea, that it would be, it would make it stand out more to have this orange, bright orange object on a blue sea. So again, the idea of the lights from these vehicles illuminating that distinctive number in that Pan Am international orange, which you don't see anywhere anymore, and to see it again at the bottom of the ocean would tell us that we're in the right place, and would be the realization of a dream, and 5 years of effort by a lot of really dedicated people who have worked to make that happen, and I sincerely hope that it does, and soon. But when is it it'll happen in its own time, but I'd like it to be sooner than later. So.
Right. And you said, earlier as well, worst case scenario, we don't find the Samoan clipper, but we still do contribute to this a better understanding of what happened by, even eliminating an area that we maybe know it isn't in.
Absolutely, yeah. We can, yes, we would be able to tell that at the end of that, that we would know where it isn't, and that if there's opportunities in the future that, as the technology progresses, or as other explorers are in the region, maybe somebody else would follow on that work, and just by doing this, and by doing it so publicly and bringing the story to people, we've accomplished something there too, in sharing this story with a whole new generation, and new groups of people who maybe didn't know about it before, and who now may have discovered something new, and something that they want to learn more about. Of course, I would like, I don't think it's greedy to say I would like it to be, I'd like it to be the discovery. I'd like for us to have that chance to write that final chapter now.
I don't think you're alone in that.
Right.
A lot of folks who are watching at home, have said, I'm going to keep this stream on until until we find it. I want to be in front of my screen seeing it in real time. Yeah.
Yeah, I think some of the other groups and scientists that are following behind us might complain if we kept it going, but yeah, we'll certainly keep it going as long as we possibly can.
Well, looking at our map here, you can tell that parts of the world are waking up and joining us. We've got folks from New Zealand right across the way, Martinique, Grenada, Finland, Denmark, Canada, Norway, the Philippines, Sweden, Turkey, Australia, Germany, UK, and the US. So, I've said it before and I'll say it again. It's cool to see this map light up and, like we were just talking about, get the story out and have people join us in this awesome work that is happening.
So the Nautilus has reached the end of the line, but we continue on as Argus is trailing a little ways behind. So we'll wait for Argus to clear that line and then begin our turn and track to the south for line number 8.
And Dee Dee, is that why we're seeing sort of this more dramatic squiggliness happening on the screen?
Well, we haven't turned yet. We're just entering an area that has a lot more topography and relief than the previous areas. So you saw a pretty good picture before with the video camera of the slope. So that's why when you change the angle of what the sonar is reflecting on, it sort of distorts the view a little bit.
And in this lower left screen on our quad here, what are we looking at? It's a chart that's sort of mapping this pattern that we're doing.
Yes, so we are lucky enough to have some bathymetry, or sort of an underlying chart of the seafloor. That's the blue with the pretty colors that's scaled depending on the depth. And then there are survey lines that have been overlaid on that. The black lines are ones that we have completed. The red one that is highlighted with the arrow arrow is the next line that we are going to be heading to. There's also some red arrows that show the direction that we're going to be going in. You can see a little outline of a ship just under the 91005, as well as the box that is trailing behind, which is Argus, the camera sled that has the side scan sonar as well as the camera affixed to it. The little orange squiggles behind Argus is its track. So we're recording the track of Argus to be able to show the coverage that we have had during the survey. As well as the different numbers that are marked on here are the targets that we have previously recorded.
And we're at 34 targets altogether.
Let me double check. Yes, so we have 34 targets at this point.
Cool. And then what are some of the more defining features on these targets that we're really looking for? I mean, you can sort of see, you know, on the side scan sonar data, different colors and shapes, but what are we looking for specifically?
So for the purposes of this survey, we are looking for the remains of the Samoan Clipper, which was a flying boat or plane. So we are looking for man-made objects that will be residing on the seafloor. Man-made objects typically have straight lines or defined edges, as well as corners, and are made out of materials such as aluminum, steel, iron, in the case of vessels instead of planes. So we are looking for those objects that are different than the rest of the underlying geology that we're passing over right now. It's a pretty good view in the side scan sonar waterfall, the orange and yellow image in the top left of your screen. Those are all rocks that are on the seafloor. So we're looking for something that does not look like a rock, does not have rounded edges. So that is what we are keeping our eyes out for and marking those targets when we see them.
And do we have any targets that are maybe more promising than others that we're maybe more excited about?
Yes, we have a few that seem to be more of a higher priority at this point. So we're going to assemble the group, assemble the targets, and sit down and come up with a priority list on how we want to move forward at that point.
I am so excited. The moment we've all been waiting for.
We're just excited to be able to have viewers from around the world on board with us as well.
Yeah, it's really cool. And it makes the night shift easier knowing that there are other folks awake in some other part of the world with us.
This feels like Christmas Eve if we didn't know when Christmas was.
Right. Never-ending Christmas Eve. Hey, Ed. Good to see you.
Oh, hey, how are you?
Good.
More subtle introduction for me tonight.
To me, it feels like Groundhog Day sometimes.
That's the music on my alarm on boats is Sonny and Cher's I Got You, Babe. And it's the exact same part of the song from the alarm clock in the movie.
As his ex-roommate, I can vouch for that.
Yeah. I had Trevor was my roommate once, and the first time my alarm went off, I hear my alarm, and I hear him up in the bunk laughing because he's immediately recognized it.
It is true. I feel like we all kind of go into this wormhole of time, right? Like what day is it? Is it Monday? Is it Sunday?
After months at sea trying to go home, and like my wife's like, hey, on Tuesday, what are you doing? I'm like, I don't know what that word is.
If it doesn't have watch in it, I'm not sure. How many expeditions have you been on, Ed?
I almost know the answer to this. It's between 40 and 50.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But some of those are, like for other clients, they're up to, I think the longest I did was 92 days.
92 days at sea?
Yeah.
Wow.
But we did like port calls.
Yeah.
But they didn't like become a new expedition after that.
Right.
Whereas here it does.
Right.
So.
Still a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Did
How
you
many
get
Nautilus expeditions have you done, Ed?
Yeah.
Not, I don't know. I started on NA111-R1056-20190716T0934UTC-15. But yeah, I have a spreadsheet, as you would expect. I'm sure. I just don't. I'd have to call it up. I'd have to call it up and look. That's a good question. I have 6 minutes and 44 seconds before my laundry's done, so I'll tell you.
What was one of the most interesting sea creatures that you found in your...
Wow. I'm a big fan of the giant Pacific octopus in the Pacific Northwest. That's one of my favorite marine organisms. They can stretch 20 feet to 25 feet across from tentacle to tentacle, and their mantle is larger than a basketball, and they're super smart. And the females mate once in their life, and then they find a den or a place to put their eggs, and then they oxygenate those eggs until the end of their life when they hatch.
Have you... Okay, so first of all, there's a great book on octopus called The Soul of an Octopus, or
I've
Soul
heard
of
of
an
that.
Octopus.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
It's a great book, and in it she goes into detail about it's the Seattle Aquarium, and every Valentine's Day or every other Valentine's Day. Do you know this story?
Yes.
They set their resident octopus up on a date with another octopus, and they'll either fall in love or they will kill each other.
Yes. Yeah.
True romance.
I know, true romance.
That's going to be in Mumbian.
Actually, Cal Academy of Science has a similar Valentine's Day tradition. They have penguins there that create their nests, and as part of creating their nests, the crew will put in little felted hearts, and the penguins will pick the hearts and decorate their nests with them. So
that's cool.
Yeah.
I like Dumbo octopus as well.
Yep.
They're pretty cool. Mainly, that's because I worked with the chief scientist for on those since 2005, and that's her favorite animal. So every time I see one, I think of her. As a matter of fact, Summer was just out with her, and I meant to ask her, did they see any Dumbo octopus?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We saw
And
maybe a Dumbo.
You can guess from their name what they look like.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're pretty cute.
I always like, as much as we're focused on the deep sea and the cool animals that we get to see, I really like the human experience of the things I get to see. Coming out to sea, and there you go. How people get to experience it for the first time. Like we were talking to Peyton, the ocean science intern, about his experience from, and I'm sure Alyssa's had the same thing, is from the time you hear of the internship and you start gathering all the materials and getting sponsorship letters and letters of recommendation and applying and getting selected for the next round and moving all of that build up until you're walking up the gangway and you're walking into the control van for the first time and you lay hands on the ROVs or whatever your area of expertise. I love to hear about people's experience like that. We had a student on board as an intern once who since returned as a contractor, who in her bio, she said that in her freshman year of college, a professor at the beginning of a semester showed Dr. Ballard's TED Talk.
Oh, wow.
And at the end of the class, she went up to the professor and she said, that's what I was meant to do with my life.
Wow.
And she changed her major and pursued that. And she was on the vessel for the very first time, standing her very first watch. And Bob had flown in, I think, from the UAE that night. It was middle of the night. And so, because he couldn't sleep, he came up and sat down right beside her. And so I coaxed her into telling that story on SPL. And she did great. But as soon as he left, she started crying and said, he said my name.
A dream realized.
So I love stuff like that about going to sea. I got to sail with a professor for many years who a very long time ago in the 80s thought up the idea of a cabled ocean observatory, a permanent human presence measuring and quantifying the ocean and turning it into a data set so that humans can understand it. And sending out power and connectivity, and then storing all of this data and video, etc. And I got to be at sea with him when he realized he had done it. 25, maybe more than 25 years later, and that was a great moment. So as much as I love everything we get to see and learn about the deep sea, I'm a people person too, and I can't neglect the impact we have on, you know, both young professionals and, you know, people later in their career who get to have those keystone moments.
Yeah, and we've talked about it too, you know, this idea that science takes all backgrounds and everybody here is from such a unique place. You know, we have historians, I'm a journalist, we have engineers and videographers, and it takes all kinds. Alyssa, as an incoming intern, you know, what's your experience? How did you get here and what inspired you? Yeah.
So I guess I grew up on the Cape, which is pretty much on the ocean. So I guess that was a good start. So I was out in the water growing up. And then I participated in a program called Sea Semester as my study abroad program. So that's a tall ship sailing program. And really figured out I love the ocean. And I was also a physics major. So I decided to couple the physics with the ocean and ended up in grad school for ocean engineering. And here I am.
And here you are.
The funny thing is, when I first heard you tell that story, I was thinking in the back of my head, oh, I probably sailed with 400 or 500 students. And I remember I had sailed with a student once who had done Sea Semester and said great things about it, really, really enjoyed it. And it turns out that we both know her.
No way.
Yeah. As a matter of fact, she was on Sea Semester with Alyssa.
With me.
No way.
Small world.
So did you guys talk about this internship together before you came here? Or
No,
was it just by coincidence?
She and I sailed on a different vessel, and I was in a different capacity.
Gotcha.
So she wasn't on Nautilus.
Gotcha.
But yeah, so.
Wow, that's too cool.
You just never know who's going to know people you know.
It's true.
Right.
It's true.
And this is a young woman, a young professional who's actually from France, so it was strange that we, yeah.
That is too cool. So you're a seasoned seafarer then. This isn't your first rodeo.
No, but it's definitely different being from tall ship to a research vessel.
Is it?
And this is my first time with a engineering specific internship, so this is really appreciative of the opportunity here to learn more about the ROVs and just engineering in general.
And do you get seasick, or have you ever been seasick?
Have been seasick.
Yes.
Did well this time out, so I'm one of those people I just need to snack, make sure I drink a lot of water, take a couple breaks outside occasionally, and it's usually how I roll. So
it's all relative.
Video's gone off comms for a couple.
And for those that are just tuning in or curious about what we're doing, we are still conducting some side scan sonar measurements of the bottom of the sea floor. So Argus is operating at a depth of a little over 3,000 meters. And the goal here is to sort of find points along the ocean floor that look to be human caused. So straight lines, right angles, other characteristics that maybe don't appear in nature. And our data team is logging those and keeping track of them. Argus is, by itself down there, and so we'll go back after some analysis with the whole team and do a little bit more in-depth look at those points and see if they are indeed involved with the Samoan clipper. Russ, we've talked a lot about, you know, what we hope to find and sort of what we're looking for.
Maddie,
Yeah.
Russ stepped out
Oh, he did.
for
Okay.
a second, yeah.
I'll save that question then.
So we have finished up with our previous line. The ship is making its way south, and Argus is following along behind it. So it'll take us a little time to get turned around and headed back for our next line, which is line number 8.
Dee, how did, you know, we're looking at this lawnmower style pattern of mapping the bottom of the floor. What determines that? I mean, how did the team sort of come up with that grid pattern? Is that sort of standard, or is that unique to this expedition?
Yeah, the parallel lines within a box is a pretty standard survey methodology for remote sensing, which is the type of equipment that we're using, the side scan sonar. That pattern allows us to have an even, straight track for the vessel as well as the accompanying equipment. And you can adjust the spacing of those lines depending on the coverage that you're looking for. So pretty standard all in all. Sometimes you will adjust the orientation based upon the seafloor topography as well as the wind or wave action. The equipment does best when you're heading in or with following seas, not necessarily going against them as it jogs the instruments around. So there's a few variables, but the methodology is in general exactly what we're doing. We're known as mowing the lawn, just going back and forth, covering those lines.
And then we have about 34 potential targets, right, that we've marked since beginning?
That is correct. We are at 34.
What sort of other sort of expeditions has the same technology and methodology been used for? Is it mostly, you know, for looking for downed vessels and aircrafts, and you know, shipwrecks, or is it more expansive than that?
The same tools, such as the side scan sonar, is used for a variety of projects, including what we're doing, looking for an airplane. It's very commonly used for finding downed, you know, modern-day airplanes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But shipwrecks, other vessels, whether they be modern or historic. It's used for mapping the seafloor for geology, as well as for fish habitats. It's used a lot for. Also, interestingly enough, many police organizations use this for looking for, I don't want bodies is sad to say, but they do look for bodies as well as other, you know, cars or things like that that might have been thrown in the water. So these are used for a variety of reasons.
Interesting.
Anything that involves looking for what's on the seafloor, this is what they typically use.
And we're at a depth of just over 3,000 meters. Is that, I mean, does it go, can this technology be employed for even deeper than that in other circumstances?
I believe so. Most of the time, the deep water surveys use autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs. This is the same technology used to search for the Malaysian Airways flight that went down. So the technology is the same. Sometimes it'll have slightly different sensors on them, but the theory and the technology is exactly the same.
And what sort of projects have you worked on in the past that were maybe most interesting using the same sort of technology?
Oh, this is sort of the standard go-to first step in any archaeological work on the water. Most of the work involves not knowing exactly where a vessel went down. You might have a vague idea, you know, 10 miles off of this point or this or that, but it takes mowing the lawn, just like we're doing, to locate those vessels. And while you'll see the vessel is turning, that's not necessarily within the survey box. We still record all of that information, since I know many fellow archaeologists have found numerous shipwrecks on the turns. There'll just be a little bit of something that looks unusual as you're turning.
Oh, wow.
And then you'll go back and, you know, there you go. There's something I totally did not expect. So this is just a standard way of doing research.
And what does it feel like when you actually come across what you're looking for? I mean, I imagine it's one of the more exhilarating experiences in your career.
It's very, very neat. As viewers might see, it's not necessarily the most exciting thing to watch, the side scan sonar scrolling screen. So the hint of finding what you're looking for or something potentially totally unexpected is pretty exciting. That provides the first step, and then going back with either scuba divers if it's shallow enough, or remotely operated vehicles like Argus that's down here, or Hercules, and being able to see what you found.
And Dee Dee, how did you get into this? I mean, did you always know that you wanted to go into marine archaeology, or?
I have to say no, it was not one of those. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. I've always been interested in history, and I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is full of maritime history all around it. And boating, on being on the water, and like many of us, an early certification for scuba diving, and ended up just taking a class in underwater archaeology in college, my last semester senior year, and said, hey, this sounds pretty cool. It's something I want to do.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So ended up going to graduate school in maritime archaeology, and here we are.
That's super cool. So you went through almost your entire undergraduate career before having that extra spark of being like, this is what I'm going to do.
Yeah. I was a political science major, and yeah, I know, totally random,
Yeah.
but like the history aspect more than the legal aspect. And thanks to just taking one of those elective courses, you know, totally changed what I thought I was going to do.
Wow. And then what does curriculum sort of look like for studying marine archaeology? Is it a lot of hands-on in the field work, or are you behind the scenes in the lab? Combination?
Definitely going through school, you're exposed to many of the different aspects of it, from the historical or archival research, the museum aspect, as well as the scientific diving, the remote sensing like we're doing now. A lot has to do with ship construction and being able to identify and record vessels that you might locate. And really you're exposed to all of those different courses within the curriculum, and people tend to, just based on their interest, focus on various aspects. It could be anywhere from working for a maritime museum to, you know, scientific diving at a university, to cultural resource management, or working for various state or government organizations.
And then, of course, that also covers ancient archaeology, right, and shipwrecks, and then, of course, modern-day events and shipwreck and wreckages.
Yes, yes. So we have thousands of years of humans utilizing the waterways for transportation and their livelihood, and as a result have dugout canoes, you know, Roman vessels, Greek vessels, all the way up to more modern vessels that we study.
And then does it sort of differentiate between regions too? I mean, what you see in the Atlantic may be very different than what you see in the Pacific, or, you know, has human societal evolution kind of been the same across all of the oceans?
Oh, it definitely varies, mostly based upon time period. For the most part, different time periods have their distinctive vessel types and uses. But there are regional differences and various regional watercraft that are associated with specific countries. So some of the universities who teach maritime and underwater archaeology have their specialties in what a lot of the field work that they do. So students tend to go to those universities in their field of interest, or time period or vessel type of interest.
Oh, cool. And then, you know, obviously we're in the South Pacific. Do you... can you kind of talk a little bit about what sort of is maybe more common here that we've seen throughout history?
Yeah, well, University of Hawaii has a marine option program that I believe still has a certificate program in maritime archaeology. So I've known many of those students who go through that before eventually getting a graduate degree. But if anybody is interested in doing Pacific region related work, University of Hawaii might be a good option for them. So universities tend to use their own backyards for field schools. It's easier, it's cheaper, and that's where you get the local hands-on knowledge.
University of Hawaii also used to have a fantastic ROV program, and I think they still do. It's just the professor I know that was associated with it has been snatched up by the military and is now, I think, at the Naval War College in Monterey.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's too bad. But still a great facility.
Yeah, and it just comes back to there's so many different facets to the work that we're doing, right? You can really kind of follow any path and end up in the control van.
Mm-hmm.
If people are interested in learning more about archaeology, there's lots of ways to volunteer, whether it's at a maritime museum or there's different field schools that people can participate in. So there are definitely ways to not necessarily do this as a career, but to be able to go out and volunteer and learn more about archaeology.
And even the name itself, marine archaeology, I mean, that may be intimidating. Is it accessible to anyone and everyone in terms of, you know, if you just have an interest, like get out there and try it?
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be a diver or even work underwater to do maritime archaeology. It also encompasses coastal infrastructure such as docks and piers. It could be buildings that are associated with the maritime industries, so it's definitely not just limited to being physically under the water.
It's a good thing I already went to grad school. You're kind of selling me on this.
Some people actually, when you say it, they don't quite understand what it is. And you say, you know, like digging on the land, you just do it underwater.
Right.
Yeah.
Because you think of, you know, the excavations on land. So, yeah, that's totally true. And looking at back to our sonar data, is there a reason why it's orange and yellow and black? I mean, can you change the colors if you wanted it to be different, or is that just the technology as we have it?
No, you can change the colors, but for whatever reason, this color scheme is the sort of standard normal one that is used, and it tends to produce the best looking images with the difference of a color tone. It's a little snazzier than black and white.
Yeah. And then the points, you know, that you're looking at tend to be those brighter yellow points, maybe with a shadow around them, sort of like more of a blacker outline around it. Is that
correct?
Cool.
Yep. So the background is that darker orange color. That's the seafloor itself, and the brighter colors are the features that are sitting on or sticking up from the seafloor.
And then just an idea of scale, are those big, you know, we're seeing those big yellow kind of rectangular blocks. Are those rocks, or are they slopes or sand dunes?
They appear to be rock features that have some relief to them based upon the shadow behind them. The sonar bounces off of these, and where it gets stopped by a material, there is a shadow, just like if you shined a flashlight on something, there would be no light behind where there is any relief. So that is the dark portion that you're seeing where there is a lack of information.
And we also touched on this a little bit earlier too, just how natural events can sort of influence the sea floor as well, right? Big storm surges can maybe move sediment around, flooding events, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So if there is, you know, if we come across the Samoan Clipper, is there a chance that it could be covered by sediment? And if so, would the sonar be able to pick that up still?
In this environment, I think we believe that there might be a small amount of sediment, or maybe differing levels of sediment, but I don't think it will be covered. In the water that we're in, it's pretty deep, and it's a slow sedimentation rate.
And the fact that we're seeing rocks is a good indicator
Yes.
that it wouldn't have been covered.
Yes. Well, we won't be affected by wave action at this you know, depth. We're lucky by that, as well as probably pretty sure that there hasn't been any human interactions with anything in this depth of water.
Mm-hmm.
There's certainly not commercial fishing here.
No, and that's a very good thing. Commercial fishing is probably the most destructive force destroying shipwrecks around the world. So we're lucky by that.